Hey everyone, I'm Rather Incoherent, and today I want to talk about a design problem that I have with Guardians in the past several expansions. Marion is really an interesting poster child for this, because she's actually sort of doing exactly what I want Guardians to do, just not for the right thing. See, Marion is the upcoming investigator for Guardians in the Drowned City, and they're pretty unique and pretty interesting. They are looking to be a flexing, event-based Guardian, and not just is that a cool, unique design that I'm kind of hyped for, the big thing about that design is that it's going to implicitly support Nathaniel Cho. Nathaniel Cho has been an island in design since the starter decks came out. There's never been any direct support for him, there's never been another event-based Guardian, so like maybe you'll get one event per expansion that Nathaniel Cho really wants, stuff like Sweep and Kick or Toe to Toe. But now that we have Marion coming out in the next expansion, we can confidently assume that he won't be an island anymore. People who have played Cho 4 years ago and people who have played Cho 2 years ago largely played the same character. But when Marion releases with the Drowned City, there's going to be enough new stuff that Cho is interested in that it's going to breathe new life into Nathaniel Cho and make him a more interesting investigator with more options for deck building. Generally, when someone says a class is boring, they're saying if you play the game with all the cards or the first 5 years of cards, you're playing the same guy. That they're basically locked into one strategy and one form of that strategy. That's what makes them boring, a lack of options, more so than the fact that you're just doing the same thing each turn. It's that you can only play that character in that one way. Now, Marion doing that for Cho is obviously good, but Marion's also indicative of a problem that's been happening for Guardians since 2019, for 5 expansions now. Marion does not use guns. You don't have the hand slots to use a big gun without going into bandolier strats. She just doesn't have an ability that makes guns better in any way, and if you're paying for a lot of events, it's gonna be harder to pay for big guns. She is implicitly being driven away from guns into her archetype. That's fine. And if we go through all of the past expansions, I'm gonna say that same thing a lot. Going to Wilson Richards, he's a gimmick investigator with tools, and like, I don't personally like him, but he's out there and some people do like him, and every class has gimmick investigators, and I usually don't like them. So Wilson Richards, independently, is fine. Carson Sinclair is another gimmick investigator, and again, I actually really like him. I imagine a lot of people really dislike him, but it's fine that he exists, and Guardian has always had this support niche that they were sort of lent into. And it makes sense that Carson would get made and get supported and really give that identity a full-fleshed card pool. Edge of the Earth printed Daniela Reyes for low-level blue characters and tanking as a form of fighting, and Lily Chen for high-level blue characters and melee as a form of fighting. And again, these are both identities and forms of fighting fully worth exploring. And lastly, we have Sister Mary, who's there to push the Bless archetype and introduce that into the game. And once more, great individually, good for the game, glad it got made. But the issue is they have to go all the way back to Dream Eaters and Tommy Muldoon to just find a guy that wants to fight with fist and isn't being explicitly driven away from big guns. We have gone through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 now expansions, 5 years of development. It's 2019 when Tommy Muldoon got released, where big guns has really not seen any explicit support. There have been no new top tier big guns getting printed. The support for guns that we do get to see is generally not for big guns. When I think back on all the stuff that's been added to Arkham Horror involving guns, the most successful thing I think of is custom modifications. But custom modifications is typically something you're gonna be putting a lot of upgrades into individually to make smaller guns more viable compared to big guns. You typically aren't gonna have like a 6 experience custom mods and flamethrowers in the same deck just because it's so expensive. Outside of custom modifications, there's only a couple of other cards that I even think of when I think about support for big gun archetypes. We've got upgraded guard dogs to give more ability to fight in the ally slots. This is a weird one to say is support of big guns, it's more specific to flamethrower, but we have Brand of Cthugha as a backup weapon that allows you to attack over with flamethrower and doesn't compete with slots for your big gun, so you're able to keep it in play and use it to like pick off acolytes, while you have a lightning gun, shotgun, flamethrower in play without wasting your precious ammo. Like, Brand of Cthugha is not intuitively big gun support, but it's actually some of the best big gun support they've printed. And we've got One in the Chamber, which is a 1 cost get 1 ammo event, which is a little bit conditional, but it will eventually go off, and then your next attack is all but guaranteed to hit. I'm not ever gonna say there's been no support for big guns at all in the past 5 expansions. It would just be impossible to do that even if you tried to, you'd accidentally support it a little bit, and with stuff like Brand of Cthulhu, it certainly feels like accidental support. I want to showcase just how bad this is by showing off a couple of deck lists that I made for Mark Harrigan, one using 2019 card pool and one using current card pool. If I wanted to slap together a Mark Harrigan deck as my final deck plan in a current campaign and I wanted to fight with a big gun, this is the flamethrower deck I would make right now for Mark Harrigan. It's probably not perfectly optimized, there are probably changes I would make if I really sat down and thought about playing Mark as long as possible. But it's pretty much just the standard stuff you would see in a big gun deck. You run flamethrower, you run as much draw as you can to find flamethrower quickly, you run stick to the plan to ensure you have extra ammo when you get to it, your setup assets to get online faster, and a smaller deck to find it more consistently. You run a fight asset, you run a soak asset, and Tattoo Amori happening to be team support and Surge is also nice. You run Hallowed Mirror because it's the best healing in the game, or some of the best healing in the game now. And you run Brand of Cthulhu as a backup weapon. With Mark, you can run some more draw skills and rely on Sophie and be super greedy and only run the bare minimum weaponry. And this is like a pretty bland, generic form of big gun deck. But the thing is that all big gun decks largely look pretty similar to this. Maybe they don't run guts and manual decks, you have some character specific stuff. Roland is obviously running deep knowledge and most characters aren't running shortcut, but this is generally the shape that big gun decks take these days. And obviously 50 experience is a lot, this is a final deck plan. You don't need most of this. You can go most of the campaign without upgrading stand togethers or emergency cash or these skills. Stick to the plan is technically really, really good, but also optional. You really just need Flamethrower to be online. You would love to have Safeguards, Beat Cops, and Brand of Cthulhu as well. This works at 20 experience. This is just a final deck plan. That's how I always play the game, how I always think about the game. I start at the end and work backwards, not the other way around. Going back to 2019 though, look how much the deck changed. Did you notice? Did you look away and you looked back and you can't immediately tell what changes? That's right. The deck is 7 experience cheaper because Flamethrower is gone. I have to run 45 automatics as in 2019 Machete was tabooed to 2 experience and Brand of Cthulhu didn't exist, so that's my backup weapon instead. And there's no upgrade to Hallowed Mirror yet, and Flamethrower costs more experience due to taboo. But yeah, that's it. A couple of experience cheaper because an upgrade didn't exist, and you run 45 automatics because you can't buy a Brand of Cthulhu or use a 0 XP Machete. That's the difference, that's all that changes, there's nothing else. In 5 years, this deck hasn't really seen any changes. It's just Brand of Cthulhu, really. And you might be tempted to point to custom modifications and say that should go in the deck. Should it? It costs 3. The deck's already rather expensive. I don't know if I can afford a custom modifications. Additionally, that was 43 experience on the cheap version. Can I really afford to get this, and when am I getting it if I do? The issue isn't that custom modifications is bad, the issue is due to the cost of custom modifications on both resources and experience, that it tends to be a card about making 45 2 as opposed to Flamethrower 5 into a main weapon. Custom modifications is very good, but the sheer cost of it tends to push it away from big guns and more into upgrading and revitalizing small guns. And again, individually, I love that statement. I like individually that custom modifications is sort of doing what Dirty Fighting did for rogues, and it's pushing up weaker weapons without really being super usable alongside the best weapons. As I see it, it's a pretty simple issue. During Dream Eaters, when Tommy Muldoon got printed, the big gun archetype for Guardians was it was the best way of fighting in the game, bar none. It wasn't even close. Guardians today, using the big gun archetype, are still roughly comparable to the best fighters in the game. They're not that far behind the top tier disgusting rogues. They're not that far behind, actually I'd say they're still ahead of Mystic fighters. Seeker fighters aren't a thing, ignore Harvey. And Survivor fighters, I would say, are pretty consistently very rough on the action compression front, so even though they're much better against the Mythos than Guardians, which tends to be the Achilles heel of Guardian fighters is their resilience, and they're forced into running cards they otherwise wouldn't want, which it makes their resource situation and their action economy even worse when they're running stuff like Hallowed Mirror. Like, they're definitely not bad. They have weaknesses, and generally, unless you're a specific Guardian, I would say that Guardian as a fighting archetype is not impressively top tier anymore, but I would still say that Guardian is the best method of fighting. Not big guns though, Runic Axe, Survival Knife, and small weapons. I would not say Flamethrower is the best way to build a Guardian anymore, because it has received so little support in the past years. It has all the issues it did in 2019 and relatively almost no strength. or no new strength rather. And that's because at this point in time with Tommy Muldoon, it was complete. It was as complete as Seeker was, and as you know, Seeker kept getting support and got to be far and away the strongest class in the game. It probably already was in 2019, but we started playing like during pandemic, so I don't really know historically how Seeker was doing. I have to imagine they've been top dog ever since Dunwich came out and Rex was unstoppable, but that's neither here nor there. That's just your once per video bitching about Seekers being blatantly the best class. The point is that when Tommy Muldoon came out, not supporting big guns was fine. It was very explicitly the correct design choice. Individually, adding Bless, making melee and tank-based fighters, adding support, running a gimmick investigator, or making an event-based investigator that flexes, all of these individually are design aspects of Guardian that could be expanded on, should be expanded on, and I'm glad they've happened. But as a whole, we go back through 5 expansions, and the most iconic thing Guardian was doing isn't happening. There has been no support for Flamethrower for 5 years, and the result is that fighting with a Guardian feels stale and boring for veteran players. At least it does for my table. Every time that we see a new investigator, this has been happening since Carson, there's a guy at my table who groans and says, "Oh no, not again," because they see the two fists and they know big guns aren't happening. They see this tool thing, they know big guns aren't happening. They see this event thing, they know big guns aren't happening. And it's almost ruined their original class. They were originally our Guardian main. Our third campaign, we were doing Carcosa. They were playing Shotgun Mark, having a blast. But that deck Archetype's really not received any new support in 5 years. It's the same as when we started. So the iconic core identity of Guardian that was originally the only thing the class had has been gradually left by the wayside, moldering and falling further and further behind comparatively. It's still good. No one's gonna be upset when you bring a big gun Guardian to your team as the fighter. Except maybe you, because you've probably played that exact deck before with a few cards different on another big gun Guardian. In the next expansion, I desperately want to see a Guardian that is unequivocally top tier at fighting. Right now, the only 5-fist Guardian fighter is Mark. Daniela switches out. Lily Chen switches in. There are no genuine 0 to 5 Guardians with 5 fists other than Mark. And now there are 2 in Rogue. And there are big guns in Rogue as good or better than Flamethrower with Gatling Gun coming out. I want to see a big gun Guardian come out. I want to see this archetype revitalized and given the support it's been denied for 5 expansions, because what feels like a cornerstone of the game has become stale and boring to play at my table. Anyway, it's a minor issue, all things told. It's something that doesn't affect new players at all. The deck genuinely isn't in a terrible spot, but from a fun perspective and from an identity perspective, I miss big gun Guardians being new and interesting. And I would love to see some new big guns that push you away from Flamethrower and make you consider other options. I would love seeing some new support for the big gun archetype that is either just pushing Guardians in general to reclaim their top spot as fighters, or giving you a reason to play specifically big guns and not being synergistic with stuff like Survival Knife and Runic Axe, which are already the best fighting methods available to Guardians. Anyway, fingers crossed that we'll get to see a Guardian that actually wants to use big guns in the expansion after Drown City. For now, I'm genuinely hyped about Marion, as I have been about most of these recent Guardians, but I'm starting to just really yearn for the days we played big guns, and hopefully we get to see that again soon. I've been Rather Coherent, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.